Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Writing Vikings. Today we are talking about the Rings of Power. Yeah, should we
get right
straight?
to that? And a fun thing to note is that both of us have watched the entire season without talking about our opinions to each other. So neither of us has any idea what the other thinks. So our reactions are going to be very genuine to each other, and maybe we're going to find we have completely different opinions or kind of the same. So it's going to be a fascinating experience.
We've been so close to accidentally talking about it with each other and then going, no, we'll save it. And I've also spoken to other people about it. So I have shared opinion with other people, and I know what other people think of it a little bit. But I don't know what you think about it. So yeah.
So yeah, and it obviously goes without saying that we're going with spoilers for the entire series. So if you haven't watched anything of the Rings of Power and don't want to be spoiled, then you should turn this off now, go watch it, come back, listen to us, and let you know if you agree with us or not. Or, well, just if you have any thoughts on our opinions and engage.
Yeah. Although pretty much everyone I've spoken to, except Catherine, has watched it. So I reckon most of you have watched it. Sorry, Catherine, you're probably listening to this.
So Catherine, you should go and watch it.
We are peer pressuring you to watch it, just so that you can listen to this episode. All right. Do you want to share your overall impressions?
So my overall impressions for the Rings of Power series is that I thought it was enjoyable to watch to a certain extent, but I feel like they focused a bit too much on the spectacle and not enough on actual story development. So and character development, to the extent that I'm like, I can find it pleasant to watch, but it's not something I consider masterpiece. Or I'm gonna be running around recommending everybody to watch because it's, oh my god, it's so amazing. It's like, it was interesting to watch. I have a few too many issues to say that I enjoyed it completely.
I didn't have the same feeling as when when you've seen the first 4 or 5 season of Game of Thrones and you're like, this series is amazing, you should watch it, until you get to the 8th season, whatever. But that when you're in the middle of Game of Thrones and you're basically telling everyone to watch it because there's just, and Rings of Power wasn't quite that. So yeah, I understand. The way I feel, actually, my partner put this in a very, very, he put this very well. Basically, he said it was like someone had put a pot of water on the stove and we were waiting for it to boil. And that's what he said about the first episode. And I was like, okay, fair enough. First episode was a bit felt a bit prologue-y, And it's like, when we sat down to watch the second one, we're like, okay, let's get boiling. And it never quite started to boil. It was like it was simmering the whole season. And I think it started to boil at episode 7. I really liked episode 8.
Oh, really?
I did.
Interesting.
But it also felt really long. I was like, what is it over?
You're thinking about the final episode now, right?
Yeah, that was episode 8, wasn't it? Yeah.
And I'll say I'm gonna say I can rank the things that I reacted to in this from that. There are some things I liked. There are some things didn't quite like. Some things I had issues with. And then I have one thing that made me so infuriated that somebody thought this was a valid plot decision that they could justify as TV, that after that episode I rang my mother and had a half-hour rant on the phone to her because it annoyed me that much.
Should we just get started with that?
Yeah, but I want to come to that one later, so
right,
I feel like I want to start on a positive note, so that's just my little hook to make sure people keep listening. So I want to start on a positive note because I feel like it's very easy to get bogged down by the negative things, and I don't think that everything was completely negative, despite there being a lot of things that are problematic.
Yeah.
So I'd say one thing that I really liked was I liked the exchange and relationships between Elrond and Durin.
That was like, I loved it. And
Mm.
also the funny thing is that my mom spoke about it. She was like, that's the only good bit. That's the only bit that feels authentic. And I was like, I love them.
Yeah, I
So
love it. And even visually, how like Moria, it is Moria they're in there, right? I'm guessing. Do they ever actually say? It should be
I'm
Moria.
not
I'm we're gonna say without knowing then. When they're
corrections
like
in the show notes. If not,
I felt like a lot of their visuals are all have been very aimed at what they think is stunning. But
yeah.
I feel like a lot of them have kind of hit the mark a little bit, but which we can go into a bit more later. But one of them that I did like was how things looked inside the mines. Because there was something about when he first goes in and does that challenge, this felt like something straight out of like the Eddas.
Hobbit. Okay.
Not even Tolkien. Like this just
Okay.
reminded me straight of some of the challenges that go on between like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
specifically there is one challenge where Thor goes with
Utgårda Loki.
exactly goes to
Yeah.
Loki and they trick them with challenges like drinking big horns and things. And this just
Yeah.
felt like an homage to that sort of story, which is the sort
Yeah.
of things that inspired Tolkien. And it was like I loved it. It was a bit on the nose in like a light-hearted way, and it was a good atmosphere. Um,
I just loved the dwarves, and I loved Doran's wife.
okay.
Oh, you didn't? I thought she
No,
was
I didn't.
fabulous.
I liked what they tried to do with her. I thought her dialogue was a bit forced. I felt like her dialogue and acting was forced, a little bit. That was just
I quite
my reaction to her.
I really liked her. I thought there
Okay.
was almost a moment when
Mm,
she was like, "You're going to be king and I'm going to be queen," and blah blah blah. Like
mm,
it's your people, not your father's people. And I'm like, "Oh my god, we've got
mm.
a Lady Macbeth moment like here. Like, what's gonna, you know?" But I just thought she was so. She just brought me joy. I don't know.
Okay.
I just really really liked her.
Mm.
Um, I am upset that I did not get to see any dwarf children. I mean, really?
Yeah. You just hear them shouting
Come on!
off
Like
screen, right?
in every single in every single Lord of the Rings film, I'm kind of like, I want to see how the hobbits just live. I want more, not the hobbits. Oh my god, dwarves. The way the dwarves live, and you kind of get more dwarves in the Hobbit
Mm,
because dwarves. But you don't get to see how they live like a living community. And as soon as we dove into to that storyline, Dennis said as well, he was like, "Oh, finally getting to see like an actual, living community of dwarves because it's kind of abandoned in all the other films." Um, and you got to see lady dwarves, but like you didn't get to see the kids. I just
mm.
really wanted to see some kid dwarves. Like, so I was disappointed, but oh
No,
well.
no, but we did get some fun banter and character development that
Yeah.
was actually believable.
Should we, because it's such a natural dwarves and elves, should we go on to the elves a little bit? What?
Absolutely.
How do you feel about elves with short hair? I feel like we need to discuss this.
It I don't think it's a question of just elves with short hair. I think it's a question of elves that look like they've walked out of a L'Oreal commercial because it's not just short, it's also styled and like perfectly
Everyone
wavy.
has the most beautiful hair. Like honestly, it's like it's been fluffed up and it's just yeah,
But
I
at the
know.
same time, it doesn't feel like I don't get an image that makes me think of elves from it. I get an image that makes me
Mm.
think of I'm the high school jock. Like Elrond, his image, it took me a while to get used to it because I'm like, like I'm just imagining him holding like it being in an American show, holding like a rugby ball, and all the cheerleaders are just fawning over him. Just something about his hair and the way it emphasized his like jawbones.
He had very sharp facial
Mm,
features, angles, like yeah. But so I didn't mind that
okay.
they had short hair
Mm,
to begin with. Like Does Tolkien ever say that they have long hair? Maybe he does. I can't remember.
Oh, I haven't read in that much
No.
detail enough for a long time.
Apparently, Tolkien, and this is a thing I also can't remember, but apparently, it doesn't actually mention pointy ears. But
Okay.
in the films, they do have pointy ears, and it's kind of become a thing from that. But I am open for correction. This is just what I've for some reason gotten into my head, that Tolkien doesn't actually specify pointy ears. But again, I don't know if he specifies long hair. But it's just no one had long hair. Like, do you know what I mean? Like the High King did, but no one else except Galadriel. But we're talking dudes here, all right? Like, where did all the long hair go? Like, um, I didn't mind the short hair so much. It just felt like, oh, we're gonna change it up a bit, so no one will have long hair anymore. And I was like, okay, like, and the point is, like, I don't know. It just overall didn't feel very Lord of the Ringsy, and I think that's my point of the whole series. It just didn't quite feel like Lord of the Rings. Maybe it's because it was directed by other people and it was an Amazon thing. But you watch, because in this, like, I couldn't get enough. I got really into Lord of the Rings when we started watching this, and so we had to rewatch all the Hobbit films in order, and then all of the Lord of the Rings films in order. And they have the same feeling because Peter Jackson directed all of them, didn't he? And it's just so clearly, and you've got the same actors playing, the same roles, and at the same soundtrack, and it's just got this overall theme, and that just didn't exist in the show, and so it just kind of didn't quite feel part of the universe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Totally moving away from the hair thing now, when you didn't really get to share your opinion. I don't know.
Well,
Do you want to talk about
I
hair
have
first?
I have a thing that I can sort of link to from this, and this is one of the issues I think I have with the visuals overall, is that if we compare to the original Lord of the Rings films, like all of like the different civilizations feel very distinct, and that is shaped by the visual style of the cinematography, the clothing, and it's very like carefully planned out.
It's all very dark, quite dull colors, except for
Yeah.
like the Shire.
And I would say that like the elves, they are just made very distinct by, there's like softer lighting, it's kind of glowy, things are a little bit mystical feeling, and things look very beautiful, and humans are a little bit grittier in some places. But the problem I had issue with here is that, yes, the in the Rings of Power, they have taken some of those stylistic things, that like the elves have a
Everything looks
tendency
just
for longer dresses that are a bit simpler, a little bit more kind of Celtic-y in feeling. However, everything feels just as spectacular as the next thing, to the extent that if you compare Numenor to the Elven thing, like I don't see enough of a difference in
No.
how you are characterizing these to get different feels, which makes it feel like the elves are kind of just people with pointy ears.
Yeah, I
They
think
feel like
that
human. I don't know. Just other than the fact that we are told they live for a long time, and Galadriel can apparently God mode when she fights.
yeah, I think the point with Numenor is that it was gifted, right? The elves gifted Numenor to the humans, so it kind of has that elven feel. But again, everything is just stunning. Like everything is gorgeous. Even the orcs feel clean.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
A bit too clean. Like even like the Harfoots, whose style is clearly they've tried to go with messy. It's like a clean messy. It's like a
Yeah,
very
it's like an adorable messy.
yeah, it's like it's very tailored, and you can tell that somebody has gone and decided and put all of the pieces where they're going to be.
Very costumey. Yeah, which I think it's one of those things that's beautiful to look at. Clearly, there's been an amazing team on this series,
But
but
there's not much depth or spirit
um,
in a lot of it.
yeah. Did you have an opinion about the hair?
We could go on to the
totally
Harfoot's hair
changed.
because I think it looked stupid.
Didn't really think about the Harvard head,
No,
but
like
I like the little things they had. stuffed in their hair.
Thing is, I would just like some justification as why they decided that just stuffing random stuff in your hair so that it looks like a bird's nest is a fashion choice.
I don't know. Yeah, go on.
Just more that, like, if you compare to like actual different kind of human traditions, I can't think of anything where you would decide like that doesn't conscious people like because I mean all of these things, even though they are different races, they are essentially come from human characteristics because it's humans, us, that are writing them. And humans generally have a tendency to want to look beautiful in some way or another. So why would you make yourself look like you've been dragged through a bush backwards intentionally?
I quite like that little cottage core feeling.
But I don't think that's an ugly core without it looking like you just woke up in a bush.
But I don't know if those things were meant to look like they were messy, or if that was their way, that if they thought they looked pretty or beautiful. Do you know what if they put, what do they put in their hair? Leaves and sticks and stuff. If I think they put it in their hair as decoration.
Yeah,
I didn't actually
I would
think
like to have seen some justification of that, or demonstration of how they think that this works, rather than it just look. I don't know. It bothered me. I mean, I had other things with them that bothered me. To be fair, I like. If I talk about one storyline that interested me the least, it is the storyline with the Harfoots.
Should we move on to Harfoots then?
Okay, let's move on to Harfoots. Okay, and my biggest issue is on the lines with this hair thing is that how they were portrayed as a culture felt very essentialist in a way. That they seemed like the script united around them, constantly saying the same things, going that no one gets left behind in unison, that almost felt kind of like a cult. And like that's why it felt very essentialist, like, oh, we are going to signify that these are a people by making them chant things together and having their signifying words that they always say in unison together.
This totally did not get to me. Like, this did not bother me at all. I think in a way, I understand where you're coming from. I think in a way they do only have each other. They're terrified of everything that's bigger than they are. But it just didn't bother me. Like, but I can see why.
Yeah. And like, I don't have a problem with them being terrified and needing to bond together. I just find it very unrealistic and very like kind of culty. And maybe it's because I've been studying a lot of anthropology, and so I've had to like read a lot of texts from like the 1800s and things where people do describe cultures in terms of their essential properties, and it can be very generic and limited and restricting to like the view of there being more nuances within people within a culture and different views within a culture, that when somebody comes along and just looks at them, they can be like, oh, this group, they can be characterized by they like nature, or they always wear the color red or something. And
a bit like divergent factions.
Yeah, and I kind of felt like the writers took this approach to constructing the Harfoots of like, let's think of 3 or 4 things, and this is how we identify that they are Harfoots. And one of them is that they go around chanting this same line all the time. It just didn't feel realistic to me in a way. But yeah.
I mean, I didn't really react to it, but fair enough. Do Harfoots exist in Tolkien's universe? Because I have not read any other books apart from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I don't remember the Silmarillion clearly, but I think I've just seen discussions online that the Harfoots do exist, but that they don't exist in this time period. They come later. So they are the predecessors to the Hobbits, but they are not around.
Because I mean, everyone must have seen the first scene, and just before they even mentioned Harfoots and gone, oh, Hobbits.
Exactly.
Traveling Hobbits.
And I think I heard that the theory is that they put them in and made the choice to do that because people if they're just watching elves and men and dwarves, they're going to be wondering, where's the hobbits? Because if they haven't read
I love
stuff,
hobbits.
yeah.
Like, I genuinely just love hobbits. They're like
Yeah.
my favorite creature. They're great.
Yeah,
And it actually made me sad that there weren't any hobbits. But then if hobbits are predecessors to hobbits, then that makes sense. But do you mean that hobbits didn't exist during this time period? That they lived
not
even
yet. As far, like I said, I haven't read the stuff myself for a while, so I don't remember and I can't confirm, but I've seen discussions online that say that.
Okay. I need to read more Lord of the Rings stuff. But okay, fair enough. Seeing as we're on hobbits, should we go on to the stranger?
Yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay. I don't even know where to start. Okay, so first thought is like, oh, we're meant to think it's Gandalf. And I'm like, let's not be tricked here, right? It's too good to be true. It ain't Gandalf. I was like, could be Saruman. It could be literally.
I think I would have preferred it if it was Saruman.
I was during this whole thing, Dennis is like, oh yeah, Gandalf. And I met a colleague at work, and he was like, it's obviously Gandalf. I'm like, doesn't have to be. Like, doesn't have to be. Like, keep your options open, you know? Like, they want us to think it's Gandalf, all right? So don't be fooled. And so he just felt so lost for being, like, lost in his own identity that I was like, maybe it really isn't Gandalf. And then these what were they? Witches?
Oh,
the three white
they're some of Sauron's followers. They have a name. I have no recollection of what that name is.
Okay. Anyways, witches in white or whatever.
Or Sauron's acolytes. Acolytes
I just
seems
didn't
like
like
an
them.
evil word. No, I didn't either. And
I just felt like they were in the way.
I hated that the score, every time they came on, played like this menacing theme of like, we are creepy. And it was just so in your face. And I was just like, no.
And then they were like, you are Sauron. I just wanted to turn off. I'm like, no. That like I got so disappointed. I was like, no, I'm not. I don't buy it. Like, not going to although we did at moments we were like, maybe it is Sauron, because there were like little things that felt like it could have hinted. I can't remember any of them now, but we were like felt like there might have been a connection, but didn't want to believe it. And then they're like Sauron, and I was like, this just, I just sat there and I was like really let down. But then obviously he's like, I am the good one, or I am good, and they're like, oh no, he's not the one, or he's the other one, or whatever. And I was like, oh, so it's Gandalf.
Yeah.
And then I'm also like, but we don't know for sure yet. No one said his name. Keep in mind, they never ever used the name Gandalf towards the end. But then all of a sudden he gets his speech back, or the ability to speak English, when he then knows who he is, and he speaks to Nori in just a Gandalfy way. Do you know what I mean? And that's the first time it really felt like I was watching a Lord of the Rings series, because I was like, oh, that's the way Gandalf speaks. It was just the wise, the way, the choice of words, the way he like structured his sentences or whatever. And I was like, okay, it was Gandalf. And or how did you feel? That's how I felt.
Yeah, I mean, at that point I wasn't really that interested by that point, because it was kind of like, I mean, I went through the emotional thing of like, I could see that they were hinting it was going to be Gandalf all the way through, but something in me just really didn't want him to be Gandalf. I don't know why. I was just like, I don't like this as a backstory for Gandalf. There's just something about it that bothered me, and I don't know exactly what it is, so I can't give like an objective critical response.
And I think that's why I was always like, it doesn't have to be, because part of me was also like, he's not Gandalf to me. He didn't feel like Gandalf until he started to speak, and then I was like, actually I don't mind. Go on.
And then it just ended up being like, so I was like, okay, I don't want it to be Gandalf, but it's probably Gandalf. And then they get to the last episode and suddenly tell him he's Sauron. And I hated that even more than the idea that he might be Gandalf. I was like, I'm sorry, no, you cannot have a Sauron that is like conflicted and like showing more tendencies towards good, and it was like, please say this isn't going to work. And then they were like, just kidding, it is Gandalf. And I hated that they went back on it again afterwards. I was like, you're trying to make it seem like this is some kind of dramatic reveal, but it's so on the nose, it's so in your face.
It was very much so.
I was like, oh, this was not subtle. And I felt the same way with the reveal of the actual Sauron, that it was so like,
I was gonna say,
so
we're on a
sudden
natural path
to
towards
discuss the actual Sauron. So I'm gonna summarize my thoughts about him.
Go for it.
First
Go
of
for it.
all, I really liked Halfdan's character.
Yeah.
In the first, he was one of the more interesting characters, and he had a lot of nuance and interesting stuff going for him.
Did he
And
not feel a bit like an Aragorn character to you?
yes, and that was the thing that threw me in the beginning, was that
Yeah.
I was like, you look like Aragorn, and you're kind of moving and sounding like
I know.
Aragorn.
And also
I thought
Aragorn
he
becomes
was
really old,
yeah.
right?
I
For a human.
thought when he first appeared on the screen that he was going to be Isildur, but then we actually got an Isildur.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, no, but he looks way too similar to Aragorn to not be related to him.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
But then, like, okay, so back to the whole part of him being Sauron thing, is that I think there was potential for them to do something really fun and have nuance into Sauron's character, that if he has spent all this time and effort to build up a front, he is a really great actor. Not necessarily the actor, but Sauron is a really great actor.
Yeah.
The actor's good also, but I'm talking about Sauron as an actor. That I felt like when Galadriel suddenly begins to suspect that he is Sauron, why the hell would he suddenly just drop all of that just and be like, you're right, I'm going to be a Disney villain now. And he suddenly becomes like this very stereotypical, like, ha, you figured me out. Well done. This is my motives. I'm telling you my motives. Okay, you don't like my motives. I'm going to stalk off with an evil smile. And I'm like, he's put in so much effort to build up a kind of front. If I was Sauron, I would not have like accepted her accusation straight off. I would have continued the facade, tried to lie and find other ways around it. I would have maybe tried to convince her that she is insane, and then tried to turn the other elves against her even more, because like, shit, she's figuring me out. I want her away. And there'll be so much more interesting thing to then play with the, is he actually Sauron? Is he not Sauron? And then like, you can see the moral choices of how his decision to follow the path that Sauron is actually going to take works for him as a natural character that is consistent of everything we've seen in the series so far. I did not like him suddenly being like, guess I'm evil now. It just was, it was just a bit of a waste for me, I felt.
I don't really know if I formed an opinion about the whole Sauron thing. I was like, okay. I think it's nice that we do get to see Sauron not just as this evil guy in a mask. I do think you've got a point that they could have done so much more with it. But I'm also curious to see where it's going. I guess they need to kind of get the story going, because I felt like we didn't get very far in one season. But I've got a point on like good and evil, which speaking to other people about Lord of the Rings, though, I think, okay, so my parents watched Game of Thrones not very long ago, and they binge watched the whole thing. They missed the Game of Thrones train, really. So they watched it all now, and obviously they're like, this is just not even anywhere near Game of Thrones. And I'm like, no, okay, why? And they're like, well, because it's not very gray. It's just very light and dark. It's all good or evil kind of thing. And there's no sex. And that sounds, let's be real, people love Game of Thrones because it's boob, blood, boobs, blood, boobs, blood, and then there's another dick, and then there's even more blood, and it's gory, and it's like, that's what makes Game of Thrones so successful, I think, as a fantasy story.
I'm going to
because
say
it's
that's not the stuff that I appreciate from Game of Thrones. What
no,
I
but
appreciate is the nuanced character development.
well, I'm getting to that as well.
But
But
yeah.
what I mean is that there are a lot of people who are not interested in fantasy who still watched Game of Thrones and loved Game of Thrones. And I'm like, but why are you watching Game of Thrones? You don't like fantasy. And they're like, oh, well. And I'm like, because it's not fantasy as you know it. Because until then, fantasy's been, I think, known quite like traditional fantasy, you know. And then Game of Thrones got onto the big screen and it was all about like just different. You didn't expect all of this sex, basically. Um, and Lord of the Rings does not have that. It just doesn't. And I think it never will do because it's just some kind of like respect to Tolkien. I don't think you bring that kind of stuff into Tolkien. Like, you wouldn't want to watch a sex scene with Galadriel. I don't know what it is, but like, I don't want to. Not because like I don't think it's just it's doesn't feel Lord of the Ringsy to
Appropriate.
bring
Yeah, no.
it doesn't feel appropriate, right? It doesn't feel like the right space to do that kind of thing. And so in that way, I don't think, quite honestly, and it will make me sound like probably a bit weird, but I don't think it will grab as many people's attention, right? Because
However,
it
though,
won't satisfy as many people.
I will say that that's not necessarily down to the material because Lord of the Rings, the films, they did open up a massive new.
Oh yeah, I did a speech about that in school. Literally, why Lord of the Rings save the world? Why Lord of the Rings changed the world? So definitely, but there's also another reason why I think Lord of the Rings, this series, Rings of Power, doesn't quite work, and it's because it's so obviously good and evil. Whereas in say Game of Thrones, just because we've got this as a comparison thing, because I think they're both quite recent, very famous and popular TV series. Whereas, to be honest with you, Wheel of Time kind of like didn't. I don't know. It was like loads of advertisement for it, and then it just kind of like people didn't speak about it. But with Game of Thrones, you've got a lot of morally grey characters, and it all depends on whose point of view you're watching. We meet the Starks first, and that's why we root for the Starks, as opposed to the Lannisters. I bet you anything, if it was told from Cersei's perspective to begin with, we'd be rooting for her, even though she's an awful character. Like, it's all about perspective, and I think, unfortunately, Rings of Power. It's like Galadriel is good, Galadriel is good, Elrond is good, blah 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 blah, and it's like, and those are the bad guys, and it's just this. The orcs are the bad guys, and there is just no nuance. And in a way, traditional fantasy is very good and evil. It's just that's what traditional fantasy is, I think. Very much like the good guys defeat the evil. Sometimes the evil doesn't even have a name, it's literally just called the Dark One or the evil. Do you see where I'm coming from? I don't know if I'm putting my thoughts out there very well, but the Rings of Power just lacks a bit of grayness.
Yeah. And if I'm going to say my thoughts on that, because I think it can be a bit like, I don't think it's the fault of like the subject material in terms of like, you can have ultimate good and ultimate evil and still have interesting, nuanced characters within that are in moral things. And that does exist in the Lord of the Rings films. And what I'm going to say is this is more of my interpretation of the approaches to production that made Game of Thrones more popular, and then series like Rings of Power and Wheel of Time less so. I think obviously I don't know what is going on behind the scenes, but what it feels like to me is that Amazon is trying really hard to establish its own kind of feel of things, and it's really determined to not be Game of Thrones, and it's trying to be like, so what do we try to be if we're not Game of Thrones? They're trying to find their own thing, and they're like, okay, Game of Thrones is kind of gray. Let's make everything very colorful. And they are focused more on spectacle and creating things that look extreme, like big cities, lots of CGI, attempting to have battles don't necessarily work out. But in focusing on that, what they should have been doing, rather than being like, how do we create a style that is distinctive from Game of Thrones, You should be
Mm,
looking and asking, why did Game of Thrones do well? And what can we learn from it? And that is the focus on characters, really focusing on natural character, yes, as I said,
yeah,
character development, nuances in characters, different moral shades, and those are easy, can fit into a Lord of the Rings style universe. You just need to actually pay effort to do it. And I don't
yeah,
think that's where their focus were. And that is also why I think the Wheel of Time series failed, because that's the same thing they do. They are, it's also its biggest weakness is a lack of character focus and development, and a lack of interesting dialogue between characters also.
yeah. I've got 2 points in terms of colorfulness and
Mm,
gray. Like the actual films though are
mm,
quite gray. Like
yeah.
now that I watched Lord of the Rings, I'm like, oh my God, like
Mm,
they've just turned down the saturation so much. Like it's
mm,
really gray. Like the color work, the just it's like a grayscale throughout the whole film. Except then you get to the Shire and it's colorful, and then you get to Mordor and it's flashes of red and
mm,
shit or whatever. But it's quite gray. And so I actually think they would have benefited from keeping that feel because
mm.
it feels grittier.
It feels more real, even though it's fantasy, it feels more realistic
But
to
you
be in
want
that
fantasy
kind
to
of,
be realistic in a way.
yeah, because
Um,
there's so much unusual stuff that is happening in fantasy, magic, flying, I don't know,
you need
like,
to root it in
yeah, that
reality.
you
I
need
know
to
this
root
is
it
like a
in a sense
constant
of something
debate.
that feels real. And if we are in a setting that is constantly vibrant colors and
Mm,
CGI buildings and CGI monsters, just CGI everything, it loses that sense of realism. And
yeah,
then you get detached in some way.
exactly.
Okay, shall I go on to the thing that sent me on a half-hour rant?
Yes, and meanwhile, I'm not looking at my phone to be impolite. I'm looking to see if there was anything else I wanted to bring up before you do that. Now, I've got one thing to bring up, but you can go on to your massive thing first.
Okay, my question to the writers of this show is, have you not heard of Pompeii? What do you know what happens if you get hit by a pyroclastic flow from a volcano?
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at Pompeii. I'm laughing at the way you put it.
I got
Um,
so angry at, like, I
Galadriel just stands there.
the whole
She just
village just
stands
stands
there.
there, and like, you're just the entire, like, everybody who was hit by that volcanic eruption, it's insta death. Like, I don't care if you're an elf,
I know.
even the humans are still alive. Like, you cannot survive a pyroclastic flow. I don't care if it's Middle Earth. That is some kind of geological feature you cannot mess with. And like,
It's
also, like, afterwards you see like the people that have, like, and there is magic, you want them to survive it, get somebody to construct like a force field that deflects it or something.
literally
So
get a Gandalf wand and let someone hold it and go.
exactly, don't let them stand there and get hit by it. They're just going to turn, it's just insta death. You can't, and they're walking around and breathing in the particles. Those particles are just like glass, basically. That's just going to tear up your insides if you're not already dead by that point. And it just made me so angry that like this is a valid plot point. And like, even afterwards when they showed the injuries, why are half of the people suffering burn scars and the other half are fine?
Was
Like,
anyone suffering burn scars?
yeah, like they, in the next episode, like they go into some kind of camp and there's
Oh yes. And they
yeah, and
find Bronwyn.
yeah, the kid is walking around and like some are burned, some are not. They should all be burned. They should all be dead. And like, oh, oh, it just made me so angry.
Genuinely thought maybe for once Bronwyn would die. Like I really liked Bronwyn, but there
But
was a
she
moment
needed
when
to die. They played too much with her.
someone
Like,
needed to die. This actually leads very well onto my next point that
mm, but I have more
everyone. Okay,
to this.
keep
I have
going.
more to this, and then we can go on to like who should have died and not. But like,
Okay.
okay, because I did not only get infuriated by the sudden magical survivings of pyroclastic flows where everyone should be dead, is that I realized that so much they'd been setting up was for this moment, and it was so underwhelming. Like, first of all, okay, the Numenorians, they're racing off to battle like they know.
We didn't even see them get off the ships.
No,
they were on the
suddenly
ships. They were like, oh, look, land.
Yeah,
and
they're
then they're like,
racing really, really quickly across the land as if they know some shit is going down in this tiny little backward village. There's the rest of the area to them. How do they know to go there? And why is that the battle that they're like, oh, we fought this,
and then
guess
they're
we
just
can go home
there.
now?
And I was literally saying, I'm like, where did they come from? And then it was like, we saw them race, and I'm like, race, but like from where? Like, what? They made no decision to go anywhere. I don't even really understand when they got onto their ships that they knew what they were going. That like, I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
It felt like they were going to go and maybe go to the nearest town in the port and then be like, what's going on? Having a bit of an investigation and trying to figure out what's going on. But
So
not just being like,
rushed.
we know where to go. And then, okay, the whole contrived setup with orcs digging trenches to Mount Doom to set off a reservoir. Like the
Was that what they were doing?
Yeah, those trenches are the things. So when that key thing that was being used, like that was unlocked, the thing that
The
was in the
wand. I
tower,
just call it the wand.
yeah, that funneled out water from a reservoir into trenches, and that was the thing that set off Mount Doom. And I'm like, what for starters, why is there a reservoir there? Who
built it
there? Like, you have reservoirs when you have big civilizations that need water. Why do you put a reservoir above a valley of small villages? Why would they decide to do that? Yeah, okay, I don't know why that's there. And for starters, I got super interested by this device because they're like, oh, it's linked to something that is going to control humans. And that I thought, oh, that was interesting. So I was like, okay, so they're going to put it in and it's going to activate some kind of magical power that's going to like mind control shit. And then like that's what I was expecting to happen. And then like when he put it in and it was like, it's a river setting off a volcano for a pyroclastic flow that should have killed everybody. Like and this is the thing you've been building up. It's so contrived. And okay, now I guess when they were talking about it being connected to something that is going to control people, is they are activating Mount Doom so they can forge the One Ring, I guess. And it's the One Ring they're talking about that's the device that control people. My assumption now, because obviously that volcano wasn't controlling anybody. It was it was like, there are so many ways you could have done this that was so much better than this. It's like somebody came up with the first solution or first plot point that they thought of and like, we're just going to stick with this. And
I also found it really hard that, what was that dude called?
Which
that
dude?
Was the one that they like thought was Sauron but wasn't Sauron, but he was like
Halfdan, I think.
Oh no, not Halbrand. Like, you mean the king?
I was calling
King
him
of Southland. No, Halbrand, right? No, I meant the guy who was with the orcs.
It begins with an A.
Should we look it up?
Yeah.
I'm getting IMDb up. It's like my but I got really annoyed when he that he just God, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, when it's like the Southlands, and you're like, oh my God, it's Mordor. Like everyone is sat there. They're like, just say it, and he's like, it's not the Southlands anymore, or whatever. And you expect him to say it's Mordor, or now it's Mordor. I don't know, but there's just this text on the screen. Did you see that?
Yeah.
He doesn't say. It's towards the very end of the 7th episode, and it says Southlands. And then that like fades away and is replaced by Mordor. And I'm like, are you for real? Like that was so like it just was so not exciting. Like just give us the cliche, it's Mordor. Like we just want it. Didn't you
Absolutely.
Want it?
And
yeah, right.
I just want need like a little
need subtitles
from the character of like, I'm not gonna say it, but you know it.
I don't know. I just also why did we not get to see him in the 8th episode?
Yeah.
Like I quite
He was an
liked that
interesting character that
I
didn't really get to
quite
do anything.
liked that the orcs got more. They said more. They had more than like let's eat them. You know, they
Hmm.
were actually doing things. I really liked how they tricked those the humans by making the humans fight the humans, and so the humans realized that they'd been killing their own kind
Mm.
in that little battle bit.
Yeah, I think that
I
was one of the
actually quite
few.
yeah. Go on.
Yeah, that was one of the few things I liked, I think. Like, I remember being like, watching that battle sequence, I got annoyed at first because I'm like, you're going to attack a village. Why are I would be sneaking around in the dark, not walking up to you with torches, so that they know I'm coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they did that trick, I was like, that was actually pretty cool. Um, I did not like how staged all of the fighting felt. Like, if you look at some of
Oh,
actors in the background, they're literally just going like this.
okay. This was something
um,
else we actually spoke about while watching.
mm.
I really liked Arondir. Arondir.
Is that the
That,
elf?
yes.
Yeah,
And Bronwyn and
yeah,
Theon. I quite liked that little story.
yeah.
I was there for it. But I get that he's an elf. But it felt like watching a video game. Like everything was so perfect and smooth and like he met every blow and I'm like, this is a dance. Like it was just, and I know that Legolas is also like an amazing fighter and blah 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 blah, but this was just too on point
Mm,
to the point where I just felt like it wasn't.
mm.
Again, like everything just felt so on fleek to the point where it just kind of lost its magic a little
Kind of
bit.
similar to the scene in the first episode where Galadriel's doing somersaults over is it a troll? And she's kind of like just dancing around it. And it feels like she's fighting like an end boss or something and just
I
wailing the
don't
hell out of it.
quite get Galadriel. I've
No.
seen people writing about this on the internet about her, why she's so different from how she is in Lord of the Rings. It's like 3,000 years later, she's changed, she's matured or whatever. She just kind of got on my neck. I quite like the
Mm.
actress they chose. Thought she looked great. Um,
Just her
uh,
writing left something to be desired.
and I liked her want and her goal and her agency as well and her backstory. But there was just something that didn't feel like her. And now I get
Mm.
that it's Amazon's interpretation of the books Galadriel, as in the Galadriel in the books. Keep in mind, I know we're comparing this a lot to the films, but the TV series is not an interpretation of the films; it's an interpretation of the world created by Tolkien. So we're being a bit unfair, I think, comparing it to the films because it's its own separate thing.
I don't
I
think we're
think
being unfair. The films were successful and did
but
something
this is
right.
my
This does
point.
a
But
lot of
they're
things
so
wrong.
successful, and I haven't met anyone who doesn't like Lord of the Rings, really, right? Because they're so successful. Why are we trying to make it something completely different? Why not go on what already exists? I
Mm.
suppose it's kind of like you can all. It's like you can't win, really. I suppose, but um, Galadriel is just so good
Mm.
and the thing is I think the actress was really good as well for Galadriel in this series, but the writer something just it didn't feel like Galadriel, and I think that was in the writing more than anything else.
Mm.
um but yeah, definitely Mount Doom, that was going back to your point.
Mm.
What it's just I don't know, they just stood there. It's like she welcomed it. It's like they weren't even afraid. I know you can't
Mm.
outrun something like that. It would have been futile to run anyways.
Well,
But
clearly they didn't need to run because they were going to be fine anyway.
the
Because
only
I
one
mean,
who
this
was
is a
really
cold
hurt by
volcano.
it was the
Mm.
Queen of Numenor, because she was blinded.
However,
I did like that. No,
I
you didn't.
liked it, but I don't get why they put a blindfold on her because her eyes
I
weren't
pointed
actually
this out
injured.
too. She's so first she's practicing, right? Because she's like, no one needs to know, right? She doesn't look blind.
Mm.
Not that, but her eyes look
Normal.
fine,
Yeah.
healthy, right? So she doesn't look. If anyone just looked at her, I mean, they don't even understand that she's blind until she basically says so. right? So she could fool the people, and she practices to sort of like know what the steps it would take to get wherever it is. I can't remember. And she says no one needs to know. But then when she's on the boat below deck, she doesn't have a blind on, where literally no one can see her except her advisor, or Isildur's father. But then when she actually goes on deck, above deck, and they've reached Numenor, she's got a blindfold on where everyone can see her. You see your queen with a blindfold on, you're gonna be like, well, she's gone blind. Like, I don't get the logic there.
No,
that's what I don't
it didn't make
get.
any sense, and there was no need for her to even have a blindfold, because it's not like she had a risk of an infection or a wound under there.
That's what I mean. Her eyes looked fine.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think, like, if you have read Wheel of Time, is it Matt? Matt gets a bit blinded by something. And he needs to keep a blind on too, because he finds all the light blinding until his eyes get back to normal. So he wears
she can't see anything at all, if she's completely blind, which is what it made it sound like, then that wouldn't be possible.
Then why does she need to protect her eyes from the light? Because I know I've heard of people going almost blind by really sharp light, really light lights, you know, like stage lights and stuff, and they've been like temporarily blinded, and they need to use sunglasses or something to protect their eyes until their eyes are back to normal. But she seems to have gone completely blind, so not really following that, to be honest. Also, on the point of Isildur, how does he become king? Like, he's not the king's son. What? Do you get it?
I have no idea.
Something?
I mean, I guess because now they're saying that he's dead because he's the only character that's died, which he really clearly obviously can't be dead because he's Isildur. They've left him now on Middle Earth, so presumably in the next season he's going to come out. Well,
they've left him in Mordor, haven't they?
Yeah, so
the Southlands became a Mordor.
Yeah, but somehow he's going to make his way out of Mordor to Gondor, presumably, and do some shit there.
But I don't get how he becomes because the thing is, after we watched the last episode, we went back and we watched the prologue in the first film, the sort of explanation, and it literally says the king's son Isildur, or is it Isildur? I'm awful with pronunciations of Tolkien names, but I don't understand. So we started sort of theorizing. We're like, okay, maybe Isildur's dad, whose name I've forgotten, maybe he will kill the queen and take the throne and become the king. But then at points, and I'm like, oh, he's gonna stab her now. But then I'm like, he also doesn't feel like that kind of person. But then I don't know. Then I'm also like, what, will they marry? And but then he'll be illegitimate because he won't be her son. I don't know.
Or he's going to end up, because they've mentioned that obviously the Southlands doesn't have a ruler. I don't know if there's people anywhere else. I'm assuming there must be people somewhere else, or the scraps of people coming out of the Southlands are going to form the people of Rohan and Gondor and those areas.
But
somehow he's going to unite and be important somehow. I don't know how. I think,
but he doesn't become king until his father dies, and his father dies during the battle at Mount Doom, which clearly this series is leading up to. Let's just be that's clearly what. And it doesn't
feel like his dad is ever going to be a king. In the
the prologue, it says, because I think Sauron kills Isildur's dad, father, whatever. Kills him, and Isildur goes to him and he's like, oh no, and he takes his father's sword. Sauron cuts through the sword or whatever, but then Isildur takes the sword and chops off his arm. And and the voiceover, which is Galadriel, I think, in the films, they say the king's son Isildur. He's not king. Do you get what I mean?
No.
Like, his father
it doesn't make sense.
King to make sense, like. So this is, I don't get it.
Unless Isildur's going to have a kid and call the kid Isildur. so that he's not the actual.
Sorry. No. Not buying it. But what I don't also, going back to deaths, lack of deaths, an insane amount of plot armor.
Yeah. I think if anybody should have died, as we said, Bronwyn should have. Like, I
loved
mean,
her. I actually did like her. But...
yeah, but for starters, she gets like riddled through like Swiss cheese at some point, and then 5 minutes later, she's walking around as if it's just a scratch.
For being a human, she's invincible.
Galadriel
obviously can't die. Elrond can't die. But it's just Isildur also can't die. There's just no one died except the half-foot. What was his name?
I don't know.
There's so many names. I only remember the names of the characters that already existed, who are younger, or the names of characters whose names were repeated over and over again. Because like Nori, I remember because the stranger, or Gandalf, if he now is Gandalf, which he must be, he keeps saying like Nori, like, so that name I've got, but all the other names, like I don't think, I can't remember any of them. But I'm like that when it comes to any series with a lot of names. I just can't remember all of them. But yeah, like no one died, which is why Game of Thrones is so good, because no one has got plot armor in Game of Thrones. And for those of you who don't know what plot armor means, I use it all the time, but basically people who are kept alive for the sake of the plot, people who just don't die because they're main characters, who really should die, or have probably encountered scenes, been in scenes where they probably should have died, realistically speaking, but don't because they're probably kept alive for a later part in the story. Yeah.
Bronwyn. I mean, seriously, I don't even know what I don't even know what the use of her is anymore. Like, she's served her part. Now her kid is more interesting. Let him take over what she was trying to do. It would have more impact.
To be honest, he would be even more interesting if his mum died. I think we've covered everything I wanted to bring up. There's so much more. We could probably do another episode on this.
You could do an episode per episode almost, but I don't think. Oh, I have
the rings. We haven't even mentioned the rings.
I literally looked at something that mentioned the rings here. And
I'm so sorry.
My biggest reaction is they were all made out of the same metal. Why are they different colors? Why is one silver and two are different shades of like gold?
Because they melted gold and
but they melted it all down in the same pot.
Yes, but I don't know a lot about metal. But can you separate? I don't know. They're elves.
It didn't look like they separated them. It looked like they just melted it down into one pot and then poured it into a mold.
But we didn't actually get to see the whole process. We got the metal bits, and then we got to see that there were people filing and stuff. I don't actually know.
No, I just, and also like I loved how like when the furnace exploded, like whatever his name was, Sarah, whatever his name is, he was just like, disassemble it immediately. I'm like, wait, you're telling them to immediately disassemble a furnace that is still hot? Like, is that even possible? Like, can you disassemble a furnace when it's still like, how many degrees has that had to reach because they've been trying to melt stuff?
My explanation to anything, I will point out, and this is not criticism towards the series as such, but actually Tolkien himself. I don't understand elven powers. I just don't understand what elves can do. Like, even rewatching the films now, I'm like, how does that magic work? Do you understand how elven magic works? Because I sure as hell don't.
It's because they are beyond us mere mortals.
But like, this is what I know. Brandon Sanderson has written an article about soft and hard magic and how Lord of the Rings is kind of actually soft magic because a lot of the magic isn't explained. Like, a lot of the times Gandalf just waves his wand and he solves the problem. And I'm like, I don't understand the magic of elves. I don't. So I will just say the rings, different colors, they're elves. They can do whatever the hell they want. I don't have an explanation. I don't think anyone has an explanation. Truly, they're just elves. I will point out, having watched the epilogue of the first film, then the Fellowship, the rings are almost identical. So that's quite nice.
Okay.
And they have these gemstones, the blue, the white, and the red, right? Which I didn't quite understand what the gemstones were special for. I didn't quite catch on to why
Pretty
they were
visuals.
No, yeah, but they spoke about the gemstones, right? Halbrand asked about them or whatever, and I just didn't catch on to what they were on about.
I think they probably have some other meaning. I just don't know.
But the rings look the same in the films, and that was really nice. It was a nice treat, a kind of little Easter egg thing, which tied it nicely together. What I don't get is that the elves made their own rings, right? So they made 3 rings, and then you've got 7 for the dwarfs and 9 for the men. Do the dwarves make their own rings and the men make their own rings?
No, I think the elves were supposed to make all of them except for the one ring which Sauron makes.
Okay,
so
that just answered my question, because I watched that and I'm like, wait, the elves made their own, like, because I don't know what I thought, actually, if I even had a thought about it, but it just occurred to me, I'm like, who actually makes the rest of the rings?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, I think I thought that the elves made all of them. And like, I do have questions like, why are they not making all of them at once? Because I mean, it isn't actually explicitly said in the Lord of the Rings that they were made all at once. It just said that they were made. But that makes me think that they would be made all at once. But
they've got the mithril. Is it the mithril? The metal from the mines, the dwarven metal.
Yeah.
Will all the rings have that metal in it? But also, how does it save the tree? Does it just need to be close to the tree? Do they need to wear the rings? Like, I don't. Even when they talk about making the crown, I'm like, how? Because otherwise, you might as well just, I don't know, place the metal just next to the tree, and it should just solve the problem. I don't understand why they need to make jewelry out of it.
I would definitely like a bit more of explanation on like mithril itself, because I don't know.
Because it's super interesting, I thought.
Okay, I have a couple of things that, one, I don't know if Tolkien actually states that the power of the rings comes from mithril, or if that is something that is made up by the show. And if
I genuinely don't know.
And the thing that confuses me a little bit is mithril is unique, but mithril is also the thing that the armor that Frodo has is made from. And I'm like,
it's what the dwarves give to Bilbo and the hobbits, and then he gives it to Frodo.
And what confuses me is that if mithril is so powerful that it is responsible for the power in the actual rings of power, presumably including the one ring, what is an entire, like, how does that match up to? You can also make armor from it that is going to protect you but isn't super powerful, just that you can't pierce it. Just how can it be used for both of those purposes?
I got the way I understand it is that the metal heals because it healed the tree, or it's meant to heal the tree, and then also you can't pick, I don't know. But the metal is not what makes the one ring evil. It's Sauron that makes, because
but not evil, but gives them that power. Because I
don't quite understand what the power is. Power to control people, power to, like, what I get this the one ring, because Sauron pours his evilness into the ring, and that's what makes the ring evil. But I don't understand how the rings of the humans, or the rings of the elves, or also, where are they? Did they all get destroyed? Have I missed this?
Who got
the other rings? The 9 rings and the 7 rings and the 3 rings. Where did they go?
The human rings, the rings for the humans. What are they called? The Nazgul have them.
Oh, right.
Okay. They are those ones.
Yes.
I'm not sure where the dwarven ones are.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. I'm like, have I had a brain, like, Have I just failed to remember? But anyways, interesting part with the rings. I just kind of wish we'd gone on to that a bit. That was more probably the most interesting thing.
It's also interesting that they've called the show The Rings of Power, but the rings are only there for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, but I can kind of obviously it leads on to the next season. And the
if
thing
they're
is,
only making the elves at the beginning, is each season just going to be next season's about the dwarves rings? The next season's about, I hope not.
The thing is, we spoke about this as well. My partner and I, we were saying this could have, or he said that it should just be a short series and make it really good. And I'm like, I could totally watch 5 or 6 seasons. I wouldn't mind. But also, if it's going to be as slow as this was, like, you got to pick up the pace and you're going to make sure things actually like happen that matter. So I'm totally going to watch the next season. And the thing is, I look back and I'm like, I enjoyed it. I liked it. It's very pretty to look at. But it is not the best fantasy series out there, unfortunately. It had so much more potential. I mean, you had the Lord of the Rings universe. You could have done so much, and it just kind of fell a little flat.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But I'm still going to say that I liked it. I just can't not like it.
I can say that I enjoyed watching it as entertainment to a certain extent, but I can't necessarily say that even though I enjoyed it, I don't feel like I necessarily liked it. I don't think I would rewatch or recommend anyone to particularly watch it beyond having an interest in Tolkien related things.
Yeah.
It felt more like fan fiction than an expansion of the world.
Ouch, that
in
almost
a way.
hurts. And I don't know why why it hurts me. Like, I'm not connected to the series at all, but I'm just like, don't want it to be fan.
No.
Oh.
But like, I guess like the thing is where like I was saying like there are some people online that are a lot more angry about this than me, or like us in general. Like some people are really like, I mean, we've ranted a lot, but I think there's that. But the thing is, like, I already had like my heart destroyed by the Wheel of Time. Like,
they're doing it a disservice, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the fan base is humongous. I mean, I've waited. I remember when the Lord of the Rings, or when the Rings of Power Instagram account was made and they announced the actors for each vault. Like, I've been waiting for this. And it just could have been so much better. But, you know, I don't know.
And it's like, I feel like they've gone for like the quick cash route. Like, we're spending a lot of money and we're creating a phenomena that is going to be remembered for 5 seconds, rather than continuing a franchise that is going to be able to consistently draw in money a long time in the future.
Because just look at the films. The films, like, people still watch them.
Yeah, and look at how like Game of Thrones, even though it's finished and people weren't necessarily satisfied with the ending, everybody's now
still got a spin-off.
Yeah, exactly. And people are now back on it because there was a level that was appreciated.
And apparently House of the Dragon, I've not gone into it because I've been watching Rings of Power. But apparently that is meant to be very, very good. So,
I actually ended up watching it this week, and I can say I've binged through like 7 episodes in a week so far.
Oh shit. So it really is that good.
Yeah. I mean, there's some things I have criticisms of, but like after watching Rings of Power and switching to that, it's like the quality is like not comparable.
Got a bunch of good actors as well. All right, okay, we'll have to attack that one next.
I'm going to round off with a recommendation that I feel is appropriate for this, and you've already heard me recommending this. I made an Instagram post about it, but I'm going to actually talk about it. This book.
Oh, I have a recommendation as well.
Yeah, because I feel like it's kind of relevant for people that might be interested in Lord of the Rings style works. So I am going to give a recommendation for, if people have not heard of it, because this book is apparently, or this author is apparently quite big in the fantasy world, but also seems to slip under a lot of people's radars. I had not even heard of him until I did a Google and people were ranting about how great his writing was. But Guy Gavriel Kay, apparently very good fantasy writer, also quite underrated.
Have you not read the book? Have you
No,
not
I've read this
formed
book.
your own
I
opinion?
know, I have formed my own opinion. I'm more going from how I felt before. Like,
Okay.
no, it's just more apparently that he is very popular in the
Okay.
sense that I I had never heard of him and haven't heard him talked about so much in fantasy circles, but online people talk about him as being somebody big, but somehow doesn't seem to have achieved the same status as other big fantasy writers.
Okay.
But so Guy Gavriel Kay, he has actually helped Christopher Tolkien editing the Silmarillion. And
Oh.
this book is called The Summer Tree. It's the first book of a trilogy called the Fionn Navarre Tapestry. And I would say it reads kind of like if the Silmarillion was actually like solid narrative all the way through and didn't digress into pages of genealogies and lineages. And that's kind of how it reads. So it reads in a way that is very faithful to the styles of particularly Celtic sagas. So he weighs a lot more heavily on the Irish mythology more than the Norse mythology, although there is elements of both. It has basically all of your stereotypes in it. It does have an evil person. It has good elves and bad elves, so basically orcs and elves in it as well. It has wizards. It has everything thrown into it in a way that is actually quite captivating the way he writes. So it's very interesting, and yeah, it's not a recent book, but I want to talk about because that's been my discovery lately. And if anyone else hasn't heard of this series either, I can recommend it. I've recently bought the second two books in the trilogy, so I'm
Oh,
gonna
have you?
yeah.
I am going to have to borrow it from you. And ironically, the book I am recommending, which is probably super boring, but I couldn't think of anything else. So I am recommending The Eye of the World, the first book of the Wheel of Time. And I'm doing it because just like you, I thought this is very suitable because of Lord of the Rings. I mean it's a brick, but we mentioned
It's
the
a
TV
brick that is
series.
the first of 14 bricks.
I don't know if I can laugh. I really liked it, but you need to have patience and you need to sit down and give it time, I think, to absorb the world because it is that kind of oldie woldy fantasy. And again, it is very much good and evil. There is almost isn't it is very good and evil, like which I think you don't get as much today, but in traditional fantasy you kind of get that, which I really like. And you said it was a homage to Tolkien
Yeah,
because it is very much a fellowship kind of story.
particularly the first book. In the later
Yeah,
books, he digresses more, but the first
yeah.
book that you can match it pretty much straight up with events from
And
the
the fact that
Fellowship.
he's so honest about it being basically Lord of the well, it's not, but when you read it, you're like, this is like the same story in a different universe sometimes. It has very similar or overlapping elements with Tolkien, I think. But it is a classic, and I think it is if you have the patience. It took me 2 months to read, and I will have to wait a bit until I read the next one, I think. But I did enjoy it, especially the final third of the book. And seeing as we will record an episode about the first season of Eye of the World, no, Wheel of
Wheel
Time,
of Time.
series by Amazon, I thought it appropriate to just put it in there. But
And
yeah.
if you want a sneak peek at thoughts of, or at least my thoughts of the first season of the series, I have written a review on my website, and we can link to the blog
Yeah, definitely.
entry in the notes.
Yeah, and I have not read it, and I will not read it until I've watched the TV series. To sort of the same reason as for this episode, because I want to form my own opinion before we dive into it. And finally, we haven't spoken about writing this episode, but I really don't think we've got a lot of time. And thinking is, or considering next episode will kind of be a nano episode. I thought we'll just save our writing stuff until then, maybe.
Yeah.
Having said that, I have written a response
to
your. I wrote it kind of like I started writing it a while back, and then I kind of finished it off this morning. I'm not sure I like it. So do you want to brief people on what happened in episode 2?
2. Okay, so at the end of episode 2, I pitched a short text, the opening of a scene of as part of a story that I wrote in about 15 minutes that I left on a bit of a cliffhanger with an invitation to Vanderlick to continue this story.
Yeah, and I did not deliver last episode because I didn't have time.
You have better
or I
things
didn't find
to do.
time. Yeah, other things were going on that day. But I've written a response. It's almost a bit longer than yours, but we'll go with it. Should I read your stuff first, or should we just force people to listen to episode 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we can have a compilation on somewhere of the texts.
We can do an episode where we do that. I don't know. I haven't read this aloud yet, so I don't know I don't know what it will sound like. But the sound of the creature's high-pitched shriek pierced Anuhea's ears. She couldn't help herself, but glanced down at the Wildadash below. It snapped its jaws together and snarled at her, its nostrils flaring. Strings of saliva flew from the creature's mouth and settled on Anuhea. Is it Anuhea's?
I don't actually remember.
I think it's Anuhea. Okay, let's go with it. And settled on Anuhea's heels. Teeth, sharp as knives, lined its purple, slimy lips. Anuhea quenched a scream and looked back towards her upwards path. It could not be further than a few feet left. She let go of the ledge and reached up for another. Her fingers skimmed over loose pebbles and gravel before they found another protrusion in the mountainside. Desperately, she climbed hold of the ledge, finding a grip, and pulled herself up once more. Her left foot brushed the rock surface, searching for a foothold. There. She heaved herself up, and before she heard the Wildadash snap its jaws at her... I read that wrong. Okay, anyways. She heaved herself up before she heard the Wildadash snap its jaws at her heels. If only she could get to the temple. If she made it to the temple in time, she would be safe. I've totally stumbled over my words. I'm so sorry. I'm not used to reading things aloud. But yeah.
It's still captivating. I love the descriptions there. And there's little nuggets to play from.
Well, you just said in the previous episode, you just said a Wildadash let out a mighty scream. I'm like, what's a Wildadash? And you were like, I don't know. You make it up. And I was like, all right.
So now I have a temple.
You have a temple. That's what I thought. I'm like, I'm gonna leave her with something to discover or to play with. So there you go. You got a temple to write about somehow, and a few feet left of her up to the whatever ledge she'll get onto.
She's been hanging on this mountain cliff for a while.
I'm imagining she's towards the top. She needs to just heave herself over the last ledge. Or the last edge sort of thing. But yeah.
Or she heaves herself over the ledge and there's another ledge.
Oh God. But yeah, I thought that was a fun actually. And there are some little bits and bobs in your first bit of text that I would like to explore later on. I'm kind of enjoying this actually. So yeah, good luck good luck with the next bit.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
and thank you for sharing. And we should say thank you for your listening.
Yeah, if you're still with us.
Yeah, if you didn't get tired of our ramblings yet.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hopefully next episode will then be about NaNoWriMo. I think because we will be in 2 weeks' time. It's Nano.
I know.
As we record this, I don't know when we will release this episode as soon as possible, even though episode 3 was like released not even a week ago. But considering Rings of Power just finished, we'll want to get this out as soon as possible. And I think next episode will be Nano related. So yeah.
On that note, look forward to you tuning in next time.